Hello and welcome to the Root Causes Podcast, the PKI and Security podcast, where a pair of industry veterans talk about all matters digital certificates and PKI. I'm Tim Callan, Chief Experience Officer at Sectigo, and I'm here with Jason Sirocco, Senior Fellow at Sectigo. How you doing today, Jason?
Doing great, Tim. Glad to be here.
So, Jason, you were telling me offline before this recording session about a very thought-provoking presentation that you saw at last summer's Black Hat. And
That's
it sounded like something that we might want to discuss and share with our listening audience.
Yeah, Tim. When obviously every cycle of cybersecurity conferences, sometimes there are some standout talks that are interesting. And one of the set of personalities that I keep track of is Jason Healy, who I believe teaches at Columbia University and is also a fellow over at the Atlantic Council. Very prolific writer, speaks at a lot of these conferences. And, he was talking about a subject that is of interest to me. It's something I think about a lot, and I think a lot of people think about it, Tim, which is
Mm-hmm.
asking the question, is it still a golden age to be a bad guy? Are the bad guys winning with respect to cybersecurity in general? And yeah,
Sure feels like the bad guys are winning, doesn't it?
I think, Tim, that's the gut feel. And
Yeah.
I think this is exactly what Jason Healy's saying here in his presentation, which is let's turn it from being a gut feel to actually turning it into objective measurements to being able to say what is defense winning, what is the adversaries winning. Let's try and develop a framework around it and actually do a better job of keeping some data to more rigorously answer that question.
That's an interesting idea. Does he give us a framework? Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, what he did, and I think we should stick to this because he actually had a lot of ideas in his presentation. But he talked about breaking the problem into three phases. The initial phase being just asking the question, is defense winning? And just bringing up a number of propositions and examples. In other words, trying to define what that actually means. And it has to do with everything from changes that we see in TTPs, right? A way of tracking how responsive that the defensive software industry is getting at uh, being able to watch the changes of the bad guys, how responsive we are, etc. And that's the initial phase one. But I think that it starts to get interesting in phase two and phase three, where phase two is more about creating a really complete catalog of indicators of threat across, the threats themselves, vulnerabilities, and also measuring their actual impacts, which is, I think, Tim, really at the heart of what we're not really good at, especially when you're reading technical journalism. The type of clickbait that you'll see on the internet, with every one of these attacks, you might think that every one of them is some sort of sophisticated high level attack. And if you look at the way that a lot of enterprises report when they've been attacked, well, everything is a gigantic ATP that is sophisticated. But is that
Yeah.
really true? Is there anything really novel going on? And so even the way in which reporting of attacks happen is extremely skewed and non-rigorous, right? And so how do we
Very,
fix that?
extremely. Well, and that's hindered by a few things, right? One of which is kind of, I think, what you're getting at here, or what Jason Healy is getting at here, which is, lack of objective criteria, right? Like, we can tell how big an earthquake is because we have a way to measure it. And we don't really have those objective criteria in the realm of, breaches or attacks or vulnerabilities. The other one, though, is there's a secrecy problem, right? There's no reason to hide the fact that there was an earthquake. But when you get into breaches or vulnerabilities, you get into all kinds of tricky issues about what do I want to reveal? When do I want to reveal it? How much do I want to reveal? What's the nature of what I want to reveal and what's the nature of what I don't? And I can see where that would be a big impairment to building some kind of fact-based, comprehensive, consistent model around these factors.
Yeah, you got it, Tim. So I think one of the most interesting ideas that came out of the talk, he discusses as part of a phase three, and that is to evolve from indicators. Right now, we're looking at indicators of threat, vulnerability, and impact. But he says, evolving from indicators to actions, and the types of actions he's targeting here is to go from reducing a global mean time to detect to a really, really specific goal, to saying things such as, can we get to the point where mean time to detect actually goes from days or weeks, and answering what is the actual answer? Are we at days or weeks or months? And then having a goal of saying, is the average organization able to have a mean time to detect of an attack to less than 24 hours? And I think that that's a really interesting idea that was brought out in that talk. And it's just one example of what would it look like to be able to answer that question. And I think if you go through, and I actually did this in preparation for this podcast, just
Hmm.
to see what was commonly said. And I got to tell you, it comes up a lot more often than you'd think that technical journalism makes it out to be. This whole idea of time to detect and who is actually doing the detecting. In other words,
Yeah.
companies for themselves have such a hard time of detecting their own attacks. They're typically told by another entity, and the amount of time it takes between knowing that you've been attacked and actually then being able to respond does seem to be a major problem we have right now.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I don't know that you would always be able to measure that, right? Time to detect for a couple reasons. One of which is, breaches evolve over time, right? Sometimes it's a single catastrophic event, but very frequently it's not. Very frequently, it's like there's multiple stages, and you have to walk through the various stages, and you're just trying to get access for a long time and get permissions. And that could go on for weeks before suddenly you're able to do something that's actually damaging. And you've been working this process for weeks before you get into that place where the gold is. And, where are we measuring from? And what are we detecting? And it's not one event, it's a dozen events that lead up to this ability to steal something that matters, right? That's what the whole defense in depth philosophy is about, is to say, well, okay, you got through my perimeter, but because I had defense in depth, it turns out it didn't matter. You couldn't get to that thing you're trying to get to. Or you did compromise me, but not as badly as you wanted, right? And so, all of that plays in too, right? Now, and I can see where these things could be defined, but they would need to be defined. And then lastly, sometimes you just don't know, right? Some attackers do things like go and erase their activities. So you can't figure out what they did. And sometimes that's effective enough that obscures things like timelines. And so there will be times when that isn't really measurable at all.
You're right, Tim. In phase two, he actually talks quite a bit about some of these things, and talking about how it is incredibly difficult right now for cybersecurity companies themselves to report on defensibility relevant statistics that are actually time series
Yeah.
or mapped to the catalog of threats and vulnerabilities and impacts. And so the problem is right now we have almost nothing anyway to
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
because we don't think about how to defend in a systematic and rigorous way.
Right. And when there is a problem, when there is a breach, there's a tendency to try to thwart the attack, plug the hole, stop the gap, get rid of the data leakage, right? That's a focus. So it's kind of this we're in combat now attitude. And I have to imagine that the forensics of going back and understanding how did we get here, though it is valuable, definitely, if nothing else, occurs later and also probably occurs to a lesser degree.
I would say, Tim, if people actually had these kinds of statistics,
Yeah.
if they had ways to measure it, it would actually be really embarrassing and really scary.
Yeah,
And
then there's that. There's the reporting thing again, which is, we are whatever we are. We're a bank. And do we really want to tell the world how badly we screwed the pooch on this one thing? Or do we want to shut up about it because we're afraid that there won't be, confidence in our bank or whatever the company is, right? And that would be a worry I would have too.
yeah. So anyway, Tim, it's an interesting idea, and I think that it has a lot of hurdles, a lot of very human hurdles to have to overcome. But at least somebody's asking the question, and
Yeah,
it's just a bit of a look back in terms of the last
right.
conference cycle, and I think there's at least one more I'd like to talk about at some point in the future.
Yeah, and one thought on that last point there, Jay, is that we also don't have to get all the way to perfect on this, right? You run into this problem a lot, right? The perfect is the enemy of good problem. And progress is progress. Maybe you can make progress, right? So as you know, I'm the father of two young boys, and we're very much focused on progress is progress, right? That I don't expect them to get all the way to what you would expect from an adult in terms of behavior and knowledge and various other things, responsibility. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get them to move forward from where they are now.
Yeah.
And I think we could approach it that way, to say, look, there are a lot of factors that hold us back from being the perfect ideal city on a hill that we want to be as an industry, or as a secure ecosystem. And what we can do is we can set our sights on being better than we are today. And maybe sitting on the hill doesn't feel achievable to any of us, but better than we are today, definitely achievable, right? And so that's perhaps where you start, and that allows you to make forward progress and get going, and then maybe figure out the way to get even better, and figure out the way to get even better. And this is the evolution of technology, right? Like what technology really has been, if you look at it, is very few giant quantum leaps and a whole lot of incremental improvements. And, maybe we get in that habit of making those incremental improvements. And even if it doesn't get us to perfection, maybe it gets us an awful lot closer than we are today.
Well, Tim, let's put it this way. You and I do a lot of podcasting on some extremely heavy duty topics such as PQC.
Yeah.
And it's almost kind of comical in a way that, we're talking about really the keys to the kingdom and how we're going to have a fundamental change, in under a decade. And things are coming, I think, a little faster than people realize. And yet, the rest of cybersecurity is just so incredibly backwards that it doesn't even have a framework to try to understand whether or not there's basic success in defense right now. That's
Yeah.
how bad it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, to even poo-poo a little your talk of PQC. I feel like in the world of cryptography, in a lot of ways, it's the same way. We walk around and we tell people to, inventory your cryptography. This, for most organizations, this is not something they've ever even thought about. They don't have a method. They don't have a definition of cryptography. They don't have an idea for how to go forward, right? Like it feels like such a basic thing, but just to have a software bomb of cryptography is an absolutely foreign concept to almost everyone in the world. And that's that's a similar thing that you're talking about. We don't have a framework, we don't have metrics, we don't have common vocabulary, we haven't thought through and defined and codified what this needs to look like. That work has never been done by humanity.
Yeah, you got it, Tim. I
Right.
think we're walking into a world, and we've said this before. And if you guys are wondering why we say it, I'll say it again. We're walking into a world where we will have operational systems
Yeah.
that are completely insecure.
Oh yeah, that's unavoidable, right? And another topic I think we should have somewhere along the line is we should dive into how to prioritize, because to be clear, this is a triaging exercise for almost everyone, where you're going to decide what gets done first and what gets done later, and in some cases what gets done never. And that is going to happen whether you want it to or not. And it seems in general like it's better for that to be a considered informed decision than an uninformed happenstance decision. But again, part of what we're impeded by is we don't even have models for thinking about this stuff today.
No, exactly right. That is what I wanted to bring up. And I think in
Yeah,
2025, Tim, let's make a it doesn't have to be every podcast, but I think we have to throw into the theme of let's really try to bring
yeah,
some rigor back to this, bring some framework thinking back to this. And
I agree.
it
Let's you and I start to define that and at least take our crack at it. We have a lot of people listen to this. Maybe someone else will take what we did and will make it better. And maybe those people will publish it in blogs and articles and speak on it in conferences. And maybe we all as a community can start driving this.
You got it, Tim. Thanks so much
I
for
love
that.
it, Jay. I think that's great. All right. We got our first to do for 2025.
Perfect.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
All right. This has been Rick Cousins.